All right, in 7.4, we're going to start looking at inverse trig functions. And one of the things I want to start pointing out for this and the next few chapters is how you kind of know when you use trig or not. I mean, guys, don't forget your old stuff, right? Don't forget looking for special right triangles like 30, 60, 90, 45, 45, 90. Don't forget to look for like reducing triples and Pythagorean theorem if you have 2 out of 3 sides. But here's kind of your tip-off when you have trig, okay, as the option. So one thing is missing. So in other words, you have one variable out of having one angle and 2 sides. So notice I have one angle, 52, and 2 sides, x and 8. Only one thing is missing. That's kind of my tip-off that I can use trig. Again, down here, even though it's new stuff, I have one angle and 2 sides. Okay, and there's only one thing missing, the x, the angle. So that's my tip-off, that it is trig that I'm going to be using. So that's a nice thing to notice, okay, to start seeing when we start putting all of them together. Now, we do have review, and we have new stuff today. So the review part of this is the following, okay? Notice I've got an angle. From the angle's perspective, I have the opposite side and the adjacent side. And O and A, opposite and adjacent, should get you to expect that you're going to use tangent, right? So remember, it's tangent of an angle equals the opposite side, which is x, over the adjacent side, which is 8. Okay, and by now we should know how to solve that. Remember, our steps are to make both sides a fraction. So put that over 1. And now cross multiply. Remember, I always look for the x's first. So I'm going to go that way first and say x times 1 is x equals, and then go in this direction. You've got to know how to write that correctly. Remember, 8 has to be written in front of the tangent of 52 degrees. Technically, this is correct. You do not have to have parentheses, but if you really want them around tangent of 52 degrees, go for it. And then you guys are supposed to know how to run your own calculator. So however you have to do that, and then please round to the nearest hundredth, okay, like we've been doing. So round to the nearest hundredth. Okay, like we've been practicing hundredths, thousandths, so on and so forth. So hundredths is 2 places, and you should get x equals 10.24. And then just look at what x is again. Notice x is a side, so it's not degrees, right? It's a side. And there you go. Okay, so for the new stuff, as far as the initial, noticing you have one angle and 2 sides, okay, that still gives you the trig. But then the difference here is that it's the angle that's missing this time, not the side. Okay, but let's still start the same. Here we go. So from the angle's perspective, you have the opposite side and the hypotenuse side. All right, so we're ready to say O and H is going to give me sine. So my equation is going to be sine of x, sine of the angle, equals the opposite side over the hypotenuse side. Okay, so there's nothing different there so far. But the difference is noticing where x is. Okay, not only can you tell in the picture, but you can tell in the equation. Up here, x, since it was in the top or the bottom of the right side, it's a side. But x here is an angle. Okay, and so you need to be able to recognize that whether it's associated with a picture or not. So that's why I like to point it out there. So remember, it's trig of an angle. That's how you know x is an angle here versus equals side over side. It's a side in the top one. Okay, so here's how you take care of that. Now, I can't just go and type anything yet. Remember, we have to have the exact answer before we can type into our calculator. So the challenge is this. Now, for a moment, I'm just rewriting the same thing, but I'm leaving a lot of space after the equal sign, and you will see why. To undo something, right? To undo something, like if you've got 3x equals 21. To undo this multiplication, you have to do the opposite operation, right? So we divide by 3, and we go on our merry way, and all of a sudden, x is by itself. Okay, well, I've got to do the same thing over here. I've got to have an opposite operation for sine. And if you will, the opposite operation is what's called arc sine or inverse sine. Okay, so I'm going to put some parentheses around this and put inverse sine or arc sine that some of you guys have noticed on your calculator. You've got that above the sine key in front. Now, whatever you do to one side of an equation, you guys know you have to do to both sides of the equation. So this needs to say arc sine of 20/31. Okay? And then sort of, if you will, it's like these cancel each other. Okay? And you're left with just the x. So I need to see x equals arc sine of 20/31. That needs to be in parentheses. That's your exact answer that's required. That's like this step up here. That's your exact step that's required before you type it into the calculator. Okay? So now when you type that into your calculator, you will do x equals arc sine. We've seen where the parentheses are. 20 divided by 31. End the parentheses, and most of you will have to push enter. Okay, again, we're rounding to the nearest hundredth. You should get 40.18. And remember to look what this is. You know this is an angle you're finding, and therefore the unit is degrees. So 40.18 degrees. Okay. So here we go. Here's what we've just done. So inverse trig functions are the arc sine, arc cosine, arc tangent. Okay. And just like you just heard me call them, they are also called arc sine. So sometimes it's written this way also. Arc cosine and arc tangent. Okay, so those would go directly under those. So inverse sine or arc sine, inverse cosine, arc cosine, inverse tangent or arc tangent. Those mean the same thing. And please remember that they are used to find, this is going to be the helpful part, used to find angles whose sine, cosine, or tangent is x. Okay, so when you have an equation sitting there, that's what that means. Okay, so now as far as just a little hint of how I memorize it, if you have another way, you'd go for it. I like to call them arc sine, arc tangent, arc cosine, no matter how it's written. And here's why. I like to think about the A in the word arc sine to go with the word for A, or for the A letter in the word angle. And by that I mean this. When I think of the A in arc sine, I think of A for the angle, meaning if somebody wants me to find an angle, I use arc. Okay? If somebody wants me to find a side, I use the regular button, sine, cosine, or tangent. Okay? So, working on that a little bit. Let's talk about calculator buttons, because if you hit the wrong one, you're going to get it wrong every single time. So if you are finding a side, use sine, cosine, and tangent. But if you are finding an angle, right, angle, then you're going to use arc sine, arc cosine, or arc tangent. Again, called inverse sine or arc tangent, and think of the A in the arc sine for the A in the angle. All right, now SOHCAHTOA, you've got these memorized, some sort of mnemonic for yourself. And the thing that's to remember, guys, SOHCAHTOA stands for sine, cosine, or tangent, right? Remember, it's sine, cosine, or tangent of an angle equals a side over a side. That's going to be super important. Okay, so remember that. That's going to help you a lot when you're going through problems. So let's talk about this. What button would you push for the following? And let's go ahead and solve for x. Okay, so let's just do a few examples here together. So what button would you push? And let's solve for x. How about if number 1, I just told you, sine of 30 degrees equals x. Okay, so I think of that as it's sine of an angle equals a side over a side, and they must have just been divided, right? So it could be x over 1. So if I'm finding a side, I know I'm going to use the regular sine key. That was the first question, and then I asked you to go ahead and solve for x. So get on your calculator. Sine of 30 degrees equals x equals 0.5. And I'm not telling you word around or anything, so I'm fine with you just leaving it like that for now. All right, number 2. What if I give you sine of x equals 1/2? What button am I going to end up pushing on my calculator if it's a calculator problem? In my mind, I'm thinking sine of an angle equals side over side. So the angle is the x. That means to solve for it, I'm going to end up hitting arc sine because it's an angle. And the required work that I would expect to see from you, and the same thing that you type in your calculator, is this. So if you can skip the step and tell me you know that it's going to be arc sine of 1/2 equals x, or x equals that, that's what I should see on your paper. Okay? It should give you x equals 30 degrees. You do have to have the degrees. You have to know to tell me that's an angle. Okay, but again, that's what you're typing to get that. All right, number 3. How about the cosine of 180 degrees? All right, what if somebody just asked you that? What's the cosine of 180 degrees? And there's no equation. Well, that doesn't bother me. Right? You want to know what cosine of 180 degrees equals. So, couldn't you rewrite this as cosine of 180 degrees equals some unknown number that you know, that you want to know, I should say? Okay, isn't that mean there's your equation? You just wrote it yourself. Okay, so if that's going to help you, go ahead and do it. And then I know that's cosine of an angle equals side over side. And therefore, I'm going to be using the cosine key since I'm finding a side. Go ahead and type the cosine of 180 degrees in your calculator, and you will get x equals -1. Okay. Number 4, how about tangent of x equals √3? So on your own, what are we thinking? All right, tangent of an angle, x is what's missing, equals a side over a side. So I must be hitting arc tangent because I want an angle. And I know that I'm going to type in my calculator, just trying to show you how to do it in case you forget. You should be able to tell me you're typing arc tangent of √3. Okay, and that's how we would write that. And if you do that, x will equal -60 degrees. Again, that's what you had to type in to be able to get that. X is 60 degrees. Okay, so always come back to this, guys, if you need to refer to how do I find a side, how do I find an angle, what am I doing on my calculator? Okay, so let's go to the required work, all right, and talk about this. So, if you are looking at 1, 2, and 3 and solving for x, why don't you go ahead for a moment, turn off the video, and just think about it for a second. Don't actually write anything. Think for a second, and then I'll give you some time. Okay, well, let's at least do the first one together. Here we go then. So I hope you're reading this as cosine of an angle equals, this is a side divided by a side, and somebody must have just put those two side lengths into a calculator and got that value of, now I require you to put the 0 in the front, so I think it really should be typed that way. Okay, so go ahead and write that in for yourself. But 0.3425, always give me a number in front of the decimal. Okay, it makes it easier to see, as you can see, just like that one. Okay, so you know it's an angle you're finding. Therefore, if you can jump without doing two steps, I'm fine with you putting this, but this is the least amount of work you can do to get credit. You can't just give me an answer. So x equals, the exact answer is the arc cosine, since you're finding an angle, of 0.3425. I've got to see that exact answer before you type it into your calculator to get 69.97. Now we're going to round to the nearest hundredth for these. And it's an angle, so degrees. And I'll box it. Okay, so either ask me a question or take the time to go ahead and turn off the video and do those next two problems for yourself. All right, let's see how you did. So again, this is tangent of an angle equals a side divided by a side. So I know the step that I've got to have for credit is that x equals the arc tangent, or inverse tangent, of 1.7824. I'm going to keep saying arc to remind myself it's an angle. And therefore, x equals 60.71 degrees. Okay. And the next one, all right, just written a little differently, but it's still sine of an angle equals side over side. It's just it's written as lengths as a fraction. Fine. I know I can jump straight to saying I know x equals the arc sine of, in parentheses, 20 over 31. Okay, and therefore x equals 40.18 degrees because it is an angle. Okay, and that's the same problem that we did earlier. Okay, so don't let it mess you up, whether it's written as a fraction or whether it's written as a decimal. Okay, if you're looking for an angle, there's your notation, guys. That's what you're required to have. All right, so here we go. Let's practice some of these problems together. So, on the first one, again, I see right triangle. My first tip off for myself is that I see one angle and two sides in the picture, right? So if I just circle that. Notice one angle and two sides is my tip off that it's trig. Okay, from there then, I'm going to go ahead and be careful to say, all right, from the angle's perspective, I have the adjacent side and the hypotenuse side. A and H should be cosine of x equals 11 over 15. And now I can tell based on my equation or the picture that it's an angle I'm looking for. So I know the required step is that x equals arc cosine of 11/15. There's my exact answer. Okay, they very well may, on some standardized tests that you take someday, guys, they may ask for the exact answer. Okay, and this would be it. They may say, hey, there's no calculators allowed. Just tell me what you would get as an exact answer. That could be it. You're right there. Okay, you know, for us, for trig, you're always going to give me the decimal though. You're going to take that extra step. Okay, so x equals, we type that in and round to the nearest hundredth, please. We should get 42.83 degrees. Okay. All right, try those next two for yourself, please. All right, let's see how you did. So again, one angle and two sides is my tip off. This is trig. I see the opposite side, the hypotenuse side. Opposite and hypotenuse triggers sine. So sine of the angle equals the opposite side over the hypotenuse side. And I just put the x wherever the x falls. I put the 7 wherever the 7 falls. Okay? I notice here I've got the angle. So whether there's a picture or not, guys, you need to recognize here that this is an angle that's missing. So I know my notation automatically is x equals arc sine of 7 over 10. And that should have given you x equals 44.43 degrees because it's an angle. Okay? And the last one here, again, one angle and two sides are seen in the picture. From the angle's perspective, I have opposite and hypotenuse, O and H. So it's going to be sine of the angle, which is 33 degrees, equals the opposite side over the hypotenuse side. And now, this should be old stuff. I'm not finding an angle. I'm finding a side. How do you find sides? Okay, don't think everything has changed to that new stuff. Well, I know I'm supposed to make both sides into a fraction, so put this over 1. And I'm now going to cross multiply. So I'm looking for the x first. So x is going to be multiplied by the sine of 33 degrees. And 6 times 1 will give me 6. So again, I was looking for this first, right? X times sine 33 equals 1 times 6 to give me the 6. And now I need to divide both sides by the only number that's multiplied by x. Okay? If you need to write it and cancel it, go for it. But I'm trying to show you the least amount of work you can show me to get credit for this problem. And that would be the following. You need to divide both sides by the sine of 33 degrees. Okay? There's your exact answer. Right above that, x equals 6 over the sine of 33 degrees. You're in charge of knowing how to put that in your calculator with parentheses and everything. Ask if you're still needing help. And rounded to the nearest hundredth, you should get 11.02. It is not an angle, so don't put degrees. That would also make that wrong. Okay, if it were something like inches, you'd put 11.02 inches. If it were feet, it'd be feet, so on and so forth. All right, so there's the difference in whether you're finding an angle or a side. That's what you need to get down. Good luck.